Hi, it's Adam McCreary from AFR AutoWorks, and this is what it takes to run 8s in a stock bottom end Supra. This Supra that we helped build with Kyle Williams from Boosted Lifestyle is a factory piston and rod, factory crank, factory block, factory 2JZ bottom end engine with drop-in cams, valve springs, retainers, and head studs to keep the head bolted on. This car dynoed at about 870 wheel horsepower on 31 PSI, and we've run it as high as, it's seen as high as about 37 PSI. Camshafts are Brian Crower 276 cams with single valve springs and still the factory shim over bucket setup, which limits our RPM to around 8,200 RPM, where we feel comfortable that it's probably not going to spit a shim out on us. This car has a Pro J intake manifold, and bolted to it are some ID2000 injectors fed fuel via a mechanical weld-on fuel pump. The engine management's controlled by a Link Thunder ECU. It has a mil-spec engine harness and a variety of sensors including oil pressure, fuel pressure, exhaust back pressure, trans pressure, pretty much the works as far as sensors go. Boost control is run by twin 3-port boost control solenoids and has 2 tile MVR 44mm wastegates. The car is currently running a 16-volt battery system and also has a leash electronics board to help control power distribution to everything that the ECU is controlling. The turbocharger is a Borg-Warner S476 SXE with a 1.0 exhaust housing, T4 divided. The exhaust manifold is from Powerhouse Racing, and the exhaust was custom built here at AFR AutoWorks. The driveline is front strange coilovers, single adjustable with strange coilovers as well in the back with G-spot travel sensors. The transmission is a Turbo 400 transmission built by James Hatfield and has a trans brake as well as a bump box, which is all controlled by the Link ECU. The rear end setup has been swapped for a solid rear axle, an 8.8 with bare 35 spline axles. The car has a custom 4-link setup built by us at AFR. The wheels are billet welds, double bead lock, and for tires is running Mickey Thompson ET Street Pros. It has Wilwood brakes in the front, as well as a full cage built by us at AFR AutoWorks here, and it's an 850 certification cage, and a Kirky seat, 5-point harness, also has a aim dash in the interior. Because Kyle's goals with the car initially were to go quite quickly, it needed a chute mount as well as the cage, and it has a chute mount in the back that's removable, so you can put a license plate back on there when you're done. So like any car, there's a little bit more to it than just making power on the dyno and sending it out to the track and seeing it run a fast time. So there's a few things we did in order to get this car as quick as it is, including going to the track with Kyle quite a few times and just getting the car really dialed in as far as the launch strategy goes, and figuring out what it likes in order to go quick. It's definitely not as easy as just bolting an automatic trans in and hitting the trans brake, sitting there with your foot on the gas and going. So one of the problems we ran into right away with this car was that it really didn't have enough exhaust flow to get this car up on the trans brake, building boost and the RPM up. So what we did is we installed a nitrous kit. Right now it's running 100 shot of nitrous, which helps it get up on the trans brake and have enough power to leave the line. After adding the nitrous and getting out to the track, we soon realized that without the nitrous, it didn't have enough power to properly stay up on the converter. And after leaving the line and shutting the nitrous off, the car would have a tendency of bogging a little bit. Even if it was lifting the tires, as it came out of the hole, the RPM would start to drop, and then it would come back up on the converter and go down the rest of the track. Now this converter is not a custom converter for the car, and it does tend to be a little bit on the tight side, and we've band-aided that or solved that problem by running about 100 shot of nitrous and some strategies involved with that. Power management is a thing that we spent the most time on, and it was really nice having Kyle driving the car, being able to just focus on the electronic side of things. How we've handled the power management on this car is by leaving with a power reserve, meaning leaving with as much boost pressure as possible and using the 100 shot of nitrous to get us up on the trans brake. And then we actually run that nitrous out of the hole just to make sure we have enough power to stay up on this converter, and by reducing the power on the hit using the ignition timing. So the boost control and the ignition timing is controlled by timers, and once you let go of the trans brake, there's a launch control strategy that reintroduces that timing as you move out of the track. And being that it's still factory connecting rods, we've been very cautious with that 100 shot of nitrous on the trans brake. The car leaves with about 1.6 bar of boost and then climbs up to a little over 2 bars shortly after. And what happens is, if we were to run that 100 shot of nitrous on top of the boost pressure that we're already running, we would be ending up somewhere easily over 700 foot-pounds of torque through the Turbo 400. So that's something like 800 foot-pounds plus through a manual trans car. And there's every bet that this thing would buckle a rod. So when we use the nitrous to help spool the turbo, what we actually do is we pull a large amount of timing out, and we just use it to help generate a little bit extra exhaust gas and keep the turbo up on boost as it's leaving the line. And then we reintroduce the timing when the nitrous shuts off. One of the questions that I've been asked a lot is, how do you make a factory 2JZ block stay together at these kind of power levels? Well, first of all, this engine has genuinely been a champ, but it's definitely not something that we did by just putting it on the dyno, turning up the boost to 30 plus pounds and seeing if it would stay together or not. There was a lot of strategy involved with us making the power as safely as possible. Now, the way we do that is by trying to keep the torque under control. There's a couple ways to go about that. One is by ramping the boost in to maintain a certain torque target, or by removing ignition timing in parts of the power band where the car tends to make high torque because it has high volumetric efficiency. Or a stick shift car, that works just fine, because every time you do a gear change, it's like it resets the boost control, right? So you can have 22 pounds targeted at 5,000 RPM and 32 pounds targeted at 8,000 RPM and just keep ramping the boost up. And what you're going to be able to do is run a healthy amount of ignition timing without exceeding a specific torque target and keeping the EGTs under control as good as possible. Now, unfortunately, you can't really do that on an automatic car, because if you're targeting 32 plus pounds and you do a gear change, the throttle blade never closes. And what you do is you take 30 plus pounds of boost at 8,000 RPM, which maybe on this car happens to be around, 850 to 900 wheel horsepower range. And it tries to stuff it into, 6,000 RPM worth of volumetric efficiency. And what you get is you get a boost spike actually. So if your boost target is say 25, 26 pounds at 6,000 RPM and you're increasing your boost up to 30 plus PSI, the first time you do a gear change and you've got a bunch of timing sitting there, that car, instead of making the targeted torque that you were running for on the dyno, now it's making 100 foot-pounds more or better. And once again, if you're really on the edge of a component and you have a strength consideration, at that point that component is very likely to be broken or be damaged, right? So what we do is we run a more flat boost target, and in those areas of overboost that happen on the gear changes, we remove ignition time to keep the engine safe and keep it from breaking a connecting rod or a component, maintaining that cylinder pressure a little bit lower. Another thing is with higher boost pressure and less ignition timing, tends to push down on the piston longer. So more air with more delayed ignition timing is going to push that piston down the hole longer, and at the same power range will tend to have lower peak cylinder pressure than a little bit less air with more ignition advance. So a little bit more air, a little bit less ignition advance will tend to have lower peak cylinder pressure at the same power level. So when you're really on the edge of what you think is going to be safe for a certain engine component, reduced timing and boost control are both the strategies you can use, and we're mainly relying on the reduced ignition timing in areas where there would be likely really high cylinder pressure, largely due to the nature of the automatic transmission. And one problem you do get with that again is when you do shift, you end up with a whole bunch of airflow. Boost control becomes a little bit more difficult on the gear changes as well. Unfortunately, this car is not equipped with CO2 boost control. It's a 3-port boost control, and sometimes closed loop strategies won't work well on an automatic gear change. When you're changing the amount of air that the engine is consuming so drastically and it sees a boost spike, you'll end up with the closed loop trying to reduce boost pressure, and you can get a little bit of an oscillation. And when you're only going through a gear for a matter of 2 seconds, a small oscillation for say half a second, you might be leaving 50 horsepower or more on the table for half a second, and you don't want that. So what we've done in this car is relied on open loop boost control with intake air temp trims, engine coolant temp trims, and timers based on 2 separate tables we interpolate through as the car goes down the track in order to keep our boost on target. It is a little bit weather dependent, but I do find that this open loop strategy seems to work a little bit better than the closed loop strategy. If it was a stick car, we'd be running closed loop 100%, but even with the closed loop setup so that it works extremely well on the street or in a single gear or on the dyno or transient, I find that we still end up with a little bit of a boost oscillation on shifts, and I can just make it work that little bit better with just an old-fashioned open loop strategy.
mile an hour, 151.
Fuck yeah. That's the record.
Yeah.
That's the record.
897.
Okay, so we just came back into the shop. Did a burnout in the Supra like a quarter of an hour ago. And there's still tire smoke coming out from under the hood. I gotta turn the light off. The interior's still full of tire smoke.
No wonder he thought it was a fire.
No, I didn't think it was on fire.
Oh.
I just said we gotta get a video of it.
You said that. I was like, oh god.
It just like trapped it all in.
We just blew out the interior and it's